Last Tuesday, I sat in the parking lot of First Carolina Bank and watched a young woman behind the glass put a stamp on a check I'd written for $60,000. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I held them in my lap like they belonged to somebody else, somebody braver than me, and I waited until she gave me the little nod that meant it was done. $60,000. The money I promised for my only son's wedding. The wedding I was told, 2 days before, that I could attend only for the ceremony, because the rest of it was for people who mattered. My name is Erlene, and I'm 67 years old. I'd spent 43 years pouring everything I had into raising that boy, and I sat in my old Buick in that parking lot trying to understand how love that big could end with me hiding outside a bank like a woman who'd done something wrong. The steering wheel was warm from the Carolina sun. I remember thinking how strange that was, that the wheel could feel warm when the rest of me had gone cold all the way through. It started 2 days earlier. I was standing in my bedroom in Charleston holding up a navy dress I'd bought special, the kind of dress I'd never have bought for myself in 100 years. It cost more than I usually spend on clothes in a whole year, but I wanted to look like I belonged. I wanted my son's new family, the Whitcombs, to look at me and not be able to say a single word about the woman who raised him. The dress still had the tag on it. I was holding it against my front in the mirror when my phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a text from my son. "Mama, we need to talk about Saturday." My stomach dropped. After all those months of planning, what could possibly be left to talk about? I called him right back, because that's what I've always done. Picked up the second he needed me. He answered on a video call, and there they were, the two of them, sitting on that pale gray sofa in their condo, the one I was always afraid to set my coffee down near. My daughter-in-law had her hand on his knee, her ring catching the light. The ring I'd helped pay for, though we'd all agreed never to mention that out loud. "Mama," my son started, and I watched him swallow. Natalie's parents have certain expectations for Saturday. I want to be honest about something, because the people watching this are going to ask the same question I asked myself 100 times since. The Whitcombs were supposed to be hosting that wedding. Where I come from, the bride's people put on the wedding. The Whitcombs had the big house south of Broad, with the iron gates and the joggling board on the porch, the membership at the yacht club, the name that opened doors in that town. By every rule I'd ever known, that wedding wasn't mine to pay for. But when my son came to me 8 months back with that look on his face, the one he's had since he was 4 years old and wanting something he was scared to ask for, he told me his fiancé's family had hit a rough patch, that it was private, that the wedding she'd dreamed of since she was a girl was slipping away, and that he just needed help to give her that one perfect day. I found out later the rough patch was a sinkhole. The Whitcombs were drowning in debt behind those iron gates, mortgaged to the rafters, keeping up the country club face on fumes. But I didn't know that then. All I knew was that my boy needed help, and I had a little set aside, and I had never in my life been able to tell him no. Expectations, I repeated, and the word tasted like a penny on my tongue. My daughter-in-law leaned toward the camera and smiled, and it was a smile I'd seen on her before, the kind that's all teeth and no warmth. "Erlene," she said, "you understand that a lot of important people will be there, Daddy's associates, people from the club." "I understand," I said. "I didn't. So we were thinking," my son said, not quite looking at me, "maybe don't bring up the diner. And, don't mention anything about helping pay. It might make her parents uncomfortable." The diner. My diner. The little place on the corner with the chrome stools and the pie case. The one I built with my own 2 hands after his daddy died. The one that fed us both and kept the lights on and put that boy through college without a dime of debt. The diner where he'd done his homework in the corner booth every night of his childhood while I worked the grill. They didn't want me to mention it. "And we've got you at table 14, my daughter-in-law added, sweet as fake syrup. I'd seen that seating chart. I'd helped pay the deposit on that ballroom. Table 14 was back by the kitchen doors, next to the coat check. Tables 1 through 4 were down front, by the dance floor, for the Whitcombs and the people they wanted to be seen with. Actually, my son said, and now he wouldn't look at me at all, "it might just be easier if you come for the ceremony. The reception's going to be a lot. We don't want you to feel out of place. Out of place. Me, the woman who worked 16-hour days, whose hands cracked open in the winter from the bleach water and the cold, who saved every nickel so this boy could have the kind of life that put him in a ballroom full of people who'd never broken a sweat. That woman might feel out of place at a party. I see, I said. My voice held steady, which surprised me because inside something was tearing clean down the middle. Just the ceremony. You understand, right, Mama? It's just one day. One important day. One day. As if the 15,000 days before it, the ones where I burned my arms on the flat top and skipped my own meals and wore the same 2 pairs of shoes for 9 years so he could have new ones. As if all of those didn't count for anything. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at that navy dress for a long, long time. And I started counting up all the little cuts I told myself didn't hurt. The Thanksgiving they spent with her family, and I got a phone call from the parking lot. The way she never once invited me when she went dress shopping, though her mother and both her sisters went. The time he told me, "Just say you're in food service, Mama. Keep it vague." Every one of those had been a small thing I'd swallowed because I loved him. Sitting there with the dress in my lap, I understood I'd been bleeding out slow for years and calling it devotion. Let me tell you about how I got here because it matters. I married my husband, Carl, when I was 22. He drove a delivery route and I waited tables, and we were poor as church mice and happy as anything. We had one boy, and then we couldn't have any more, and we poured everything we had into that one child. Carl used to say that boy hung the moon. Then when our son was 19, Carl's heart just stopped one morning while he was loading his truck. No warning. He was 46 years old. I had a teenager, a mortgage, and a casserole dish from every woman at the church. And that was the whole of what I owned. I didn't know how to do anything but cook and clean and work. So I took the little bit of life insurance and I leased a busted-up sandwich shop nobody wanted, and I turned it into a diner. The first year I cried in the walk-in cooler most mornings before the sun came up. But people came. They came for my biscuits and my chicken pie, and because I learned every one of their names and their grandbabies' names too. By the time my son finished high school, that diner was the kind of place where the booths were full at 6 a.m., and the regulars left their coffee mugs hanging on hooks with their names on tape. My son never wanted for a thing. I made sure of it, maybe too sure. Braces, a car at 16, football camp, the good college up north. He'd come home summers and I'd see him getting embarrassed by the smell of grease on my hands, and I told myself it was just a phase. I told myself a lot of things. He met her at some networking thing in the city 3 years before the wedding. He brought her to meet me at a coffee shop downtown, not at the diner, not at my house. I understood later why. A coffee shop was neutral. A coffee shop was neutral. A coffee shop wouldn't make her wrinkle her nose. She shook my hand like she was doing me a kindness, and her eyes went over my clothes one time, top to bottom, the way you'd appraise a used car. "So nice to finally meet you," she said. "My son speaks of you," and that was it. Not warm, not unkind exactly, just measuring. Her mother, Mrs. Pred, Adelaide Whitcomb, I met at an engagement supper at their house. She wore pearls to dinner in her own home. She asked me what I did, and when I said I owned a diner, she said, "How charming," in a voice that made it the opposite of charming, and she didn't speak to me again the rest of the night. I drove home that evening and sat in my driveway and felt, for the first time, like maybe I'd done something wrong by loving my boy enough to give him a world he could climb out of and away from me. Saturday came. I put on the navy dress. I told myself I'd go just for the ceremony, like I'd been told, and I'd hold my head up and I'd leave before the part where I wasn't wanted. I drove to the church on Meeting Street, the old, beautiful one with the white steeple, and I sat in a pew toward the back, by myself in my expensive dress, watching the Whitcombs fill up the front like royalty. Nobody saved me a seat. Nobody walked me down the aisle the way the groom's mother is supposed to be walked. I sat there alone and watched my son stand up front in a tuxedo I'd paid the deposit on, and I thought my heart might just give out the way Carl's did, right there in the pew. It was during the photographs afterward that it happened. They'd ushered us all out to the church garden, and the photographer was arranging the family groups. I stood off to the side, the way you do when you're not sure if you're family or furniture. Then the photographer said, "Now the groom's mother." And I stepped forward, and my daughter-in-law turned around in her white dress and looked at me like I'd tracked something in. "Oh," she said loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "We're doing the important family photos right now." A few of the Whitcomb guests laughed, the polite, cruel kind of laugh. "I'm his mother," I said, quiet, steady. And she looked at me, in that dress, with that ring, and she said, "You're the woman who flips eggs for a living. Honestly, I don't even know why you're here. This is embarrassing. I have been called a lot of things in 67 years. I have never been called that. Not in front of a crowd. Not by a girl wearing a wedding I'd paid for." I turned to my son. I waited. 43 years of motherhood came down to that 1 second, waiting to see if my boy would open his mouth and defend me. He didn't. He looked at the ground, and then he looked at her, and then he looked at her, and then he looked at me, and he said, "Mama, you're making a scene." "I haven't said a word," I told him. And that's when it came out, the thing underneath everything. His face changed, got hard, got something I'd never seen on him before. "You know what?" he said. "I'm tired of pretending. I know you've got Daddy's money squirreled away. I know you've got Daddy's money squirreled away. I know you've got that building paid off. You sit on all that while I've had to claw for everything, and you want a medal for showing up to a coffee shop in your apron." His voice was shaking. "It's family money. I'm your son. I'm owed." There it was, naked and ugly in the church garden, with the camellias blooming behind him. "You were never going to pay me back," I said. "It wasn't even a question." "It's not a loan, Mama. It's what a real mother does." A real mother. As if all of it, every double shift and every burn scar and every Christmas I worked so he could have one, as if none of that was real. Mrs. Work. Whitcomb came gliding over then, pearls and all. And she put her hand on her daughter's arm and she said to no one and to everyone, "I think it's best the help shows herself out, don't you? Before this gets any more common." The help. I looked at my son one more time and I saw the little boy he used to be flicker across his face, just for a second, the one who used to climb into the corner booth and ask me why my hands hurt. And then it was gone, and there was just this stranger in a tuxedo who couldn't meet my eyes. I didn't make a scene, I didn't say an ugly word. I picked up my pocketbook and I walked out of that garden with my back straight and my chin up, past all those people in their fine clothes, and somebody, one of the younger guests, started filming me on their phone, and I let them have the footage of the trash taking itself out. As I reached the gate, I heard Mrs. Whitcomb's voice carry across the garden, light as a bell. Thank goodness. I was afraid she'd stay for the cake. I got in my Buick and I drove to the bank. I want to tell you that the stop payment felt like vengeance, but that's not the truth. It felt like grief. $60,000, near about everything I'd been able to set aside in a lifetime of grease and early mornings, and I gave it back to myself the only way I knew how. And I cried the whole time the young teller was typing. She slid a box of tissues across the counter without saying anything, and I have thought about that small kindness more than once since. The next morning a letter came by registered mail, the Whitcombs, through a lawyer, demanding I honor my commitment. Aggressive language, full of words like breach and reliance. I called the only lawyer I knew, a woman who used to come in for the Tuesday meatloaf, and she read it over the phone and laughed, not unkindly. "Did you sign a contract, Erlene?" "No, just a check and a mother's word." "Then they've got nothing," she said. And honestly, hon, a wealthy family trying to squeeze 60 grand out of a 67-year-old widow, if they push it, that's a story that doesn't make them look good. She sent a letter back that ended it. I never heard from their lawyer again. What I did hear was the gossip. My son told people I'd had some kind of breakdown, that maybe I was getting forgetful, that I couldn't be trusted with money anymore. I heard it from my niece, Corinne, my late sister's girl, the only one in the family who ever saw me as a whole person and not a wallet with a heartbeat. She called me up furious. "Aunt Erlene, do you want me to set the record straight?" "Because I will. I'll go down to that club myself." "Let him talk," I told her. Anybody who knows me knows the truth. Corinne came over that night with a rotisserie chicken and a sleeve of paper towels because she knew I'd cry, and we sat at my kitchen table and she asked me the question I hadn't dared ask myself. What do you want to do now? And I realized I had no earthly idea. I'd never once been anything but a mother first and everything else a distant second. I'd never asked myself what I wanted, not since Carl died. I think, I said slowly, I'd like to be Earlene first for a while. Here's the part nobody tells you about. The hardest thing wasn't his cruelty. The hardest thing was looking at myself honest in the mirror and admitting I'd helped make him this way. Every time I jumped to give before he even finished asking. Every boundary I never set because I was scared he'd love me a little less. I called it love, but somewhere along the line it curdled into something that taught him I was a faucet he could turn on whenever he liked. That was on me. A boy doesn't learn to treat his mother like staff all by himself. So I started learning, at 67, to say a word I'd never said to that child in my life. No. I put the house up for sale that fall. 4 bedrooms for one woman, full of 40 years of a life that was over. A young family bought it, and I watched their little ones run through the rooms where my boy took his first steps, and I felt not sadness but something more like a door closing soft and right. I bought a little 2-bedroom place down by the harbor, with a balcony where I could watch the shrimp boats come in at dawn. I hung up cheap watercolors I bought at an art fair, and then, because I figured, why not, I signed up for a watercolor class myself. I was terrible. I painted a marsh that looked like soup. I loved every minute of it. I didn't sell the diner, but I stepped back. I handed the daily running to my manager, a woman who'd worked the line beside me for 20 years, and I told her to give herself a raise, and she cried, and I dropped by mornings now just to drink coffee and tell folks too much advice. It's about time, she told me. You worked yourself to the bone for that boy, and look what it got you. I started teaching too. A women's shelter across town needed somebody to show the residents how to cook on a budget, real food, comfort food, the kind that makes a hard day feel survivable. Tuesday nights, I taught women who'd come from worse than me how to make a pot of soup stretch a week. It was the best thing I'd done in years, taking the only skill the world had let me have and handing it to somebody who needed it. And I booked a trip. Carl and I had always said we'd go to Ireland someday, find the village his great-grandmother came from. We never had the money or the time. I went alone, 67 years old, and I stood in a green churchyard in the rain and read the old family names off the stones, and I felt Carl right there beside me. Finally, after all those years. I was about 6 months into this new life when the doorbell rang. My son stood on my balcony landing looking older and grayer than I remembered. Behind him, my daughter-in-law held a baby, a little boy, maybe 3 months, pink-cheeked and squinting in the harbor light. "Mama," my son said, and his voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Can me come in?" I could have said no. Lord, part of me wanted to, but I stepped aside and let them into the home that had never once known their disappointment. "This is real nice," my son said, looking around, awkward. My daughter-in-law shifted the baby, and I saw her then, really saw her. The designer clothes were wrinkled. Her hair needed a touch-up. Reality had not been gentle. "This is your grandson," she said. And then she added, watching my face, "We named him Carl. After my husband, my grandson carrying my Carl's name." My arms ached. I knew exactly what they were doing, and it worked anyway because that's the cruelty of it, that knowing doesn't stop the ache. "He's beautiful," I said. I did not reach for him. "Mama, we need to talk." My son sat without being asked. "No," I said gently. "We don't. You made your choices. I've made my peace with them." And then it came out, the way it always does. The Whitcombs had collapsed. The debt behind the iron gates had finally swallowed the house, the club membership, all of it. The pearls had been a costume the whole time. With the money gone, so was the affection. They'd cut my daughter-in-law off the moment she stopped being useful. My son's marketing job, the one Mr. Whitcomb had pulled strings to get him, had evaporated when the strings did. And here they were, on my balcony, with a baby named after my dead husband, asking me for the one thing I'd finally learned to keep. We just need a little help to get on our feet, my son said. It's family. I thought about that word a long moment. It is, I agreed, which is exactly why I'm going to do something I should have done 30 years ago. I looked at him, this boy I'd have died for, this man who'd called the love of my life family money. I love you. I will love you from across a fence and across a Sunday supper table, but I will not love you across a checkbook. Not anymore. You're a grown man. You'll figure it out the way your daddy and I did, with no rich family to catch you, because that is the only thing that ever taught either of us anything worth knowing. You'd let your own grandson go without? My daughter-in-law said, and there was the old steel. I'd let his parents learn what struggle teaches, I said. And when you've learned it, you'll be welcome at my table any day of the week. The baby is always welcome, but the wallet stays closed. They left angry. My son's jaw was tight, the way Carl's never was. The baby gurgled over his mother's shoulder, sweet little Carl, and I shut my door and let myself cry exactly one good cry for the grandmother. I might have been in some other story. And then I made myself a cup of tea and went out on the balcony and watched the boats, because this was my story now, and I was finally the one holding the pen. The marriage didn't last the year. She left him, took the baby to her sister's 2 states over. He hit the bottom you have to hit before anything changes, and then, slow, he started climbing. The first letter came that winter. No money mentioned, just 3 pages in his own hand about a counselor he was seeing, about words like entitlement he was learning to say out loud, about a memory of bragging to his school friends back when he was little, that his mama owned her own restaurant and made the best pie in the whole county. When did I start being ashamed of that? He wrote. When did I start measuring you by their ruler? I read it twice and put it in a drawer. Some wounds need time to scar over before they can bear any weight. Corinne, bless her, kept the line open between us when I couldn't. She'd finished nursing school by then on a little fund I'd set up for her years back, the one good investment I ever made. She'd call him sometimes, report back. He's different, Aunt Erlene. I can't explain it. He's working 2 jobs. He asks about you every single time, but he never asks me to make you do anything. That's new. It was new. It took me the better part of a year to answer that boy. When I did, I didn't write, I forgive you, because I wasn't there yet, and I've learned the worst thing you can do is hand somebody a forgiveness you haven't really got. I wrote down conditions instead. No money, ever. No using that baby as a crowbar. No more talk about what I owed. And if all of that could hold, I'd meet him for coffee, once, and we'd see. We met at that same coffee shop downtown, the one where he'd first brought her to meet me. And I'll be honest, the irony was not lost on either of us. He was there early with 2 cups. The expensive watch was gone. So were the airs. He stood up too fast when he saw me, and knocked the table, and we both grabbed for the cups. And something about that, the 2 of us scrambling, broke the ice a little. Thank you for coming, he said. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I. We talked for 2 hours. Not about the wedding, not yet. About little Carl, who was walking now, who loved trucks. About the apartment my son rented that was the size of my walk-in cooler. About the line cook job he'd picked up on weekends, which made me laugh out loud. The boy who didn't want anyone to know his mama cooked for a living was flipping eggs himself now to make rent. You want to know the funny thing? He said, turning his cup in his hands. I finally figured out you raised me right. It just took losing everything to hear it. You didn't lose everything, I told him. You've still got your health and your wits and a little boy who needs you to be a better man than I let you be. Some folks never get that chance, not with all the money in the world. He looked at me then, and his eyes were wet, and for the first time in years I saw my son in there instead of the stranger. We're not what we were. I want to be plain about that, because I think people watching this want a tidy bow, and life doesn't tie tidy. We've got something now, but it's a careful thing, built slow. He sends a little money into Corinne's continuing education fund every month, small amounts, regular, never to me, never asked of me. A kind of penance I never demanded and never refused. He's got partial custody now, and I see little Carl 2 weekends a month. We make biscuits together, that boy and me, Flour on the floor and everywhere, and he calls me Gran and asks me to tell him about the diner like it's a fairy tale, the magic place where Gran fed the whole town. His mother called me too eventually. Mrs. Mother called me too eventually. Adelaide Whitcomb, the pearls long since pawned. Her own daughter wasn't speaking to her, she said. She wanted to know how I'd done it, how I built any kind of bridge back to my son after everything. I sat with the phone a long moment, the woman who'd called me the help now asking me for the one thing I had that she didn't. With boundaries, I told her finally, and honesty. Reconciling doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It means building something new that knows full well what it's built on top of. She thanked me, which I expect cost her something, and she hung up, and I stood at my window and watched the boats and thought about how the world humbles every last one of us in the end, in its own time, in its own way. I'm 69 now. My walls are covered in my own bad watercolors, and I love them. Tuesday nights I'm still at that shelter teaching young women how to make a chicken last a week. Last month one of my old students came back, 6 months sober and running her own little catering thing out of her kitchen, and she hugged me so hard she lifted me off the floor, and I thought that's what all those years at the grill were for. Not the ballroom, not the table by the kitchen door. That. If I could go back and find that 22-year-old girl marrying her sweetheart with nothing in her pocket, I don't know that I'd tell her much. The sacrifices were real, and I don't regret a one of them, because they built the woman who could finally stand up in a church garden and walk out with her head high. But I'd take her hands, those young, soft hands that didn't know yet what bleach and 40 years would do to them. And I'd tell her this: love that has no edges to it isn't love, honey. It's just slow drowning, and you'll call it devotion right up until it pulls you under. The kindest word you will ever learn to say to the people you love most is no. It is never too late to say it, and it is never, ever too late to become the woman you were always meant to be. This morning I made coffee and carried it out to the balcony to watch the sun come up, pink over the water. My phone buzzed, a text from my son. Carl won't stop asking when he can come make biscuits again. Any chance next weekend? I smiled, and I typed back that next weekend would be just fine, and to bring the boy on, and we'd make a mess of my kitchen together. 3 years ago, those words would have been impossible. That's the thing nobody tells you about the healing. It doesn't come down in one big dramatic moment. It comes in small steps, in quiet choices, in biscuits and boundaries, one ordinary morning at a time. I finished my coffee as the sun cleared the horizon and laid a road of gold straight across the harbor. A whole day stretched out in front of me, and every hour of it was mine. And that, more than the reconciling, more even than the grandbaby with my Carl's name in his trucks, that is the thing I'm proudest of. Not that my son came back, but that when he did, he came back to a woman who finally knew her own worth, and never again set it down on the counter for somebody else to spend.